Hey guys, it's your favorite Donabot here, and welcome to another Marvel, or at least Marvel Cinematic Universe based story. What if Hela turned good? Now, this is actually going to be vastly different from the what if because it actually made me see something. Why did Odin treat Hela so differently than Thor? They both did the same thing, killing without or starting fights without provocation. Yet, notice how Odin banished her to avoid while Thor actually got to be banished to an area where he could learn some humility? Sounds to me like someone was playing favorites and also sent the Valkyries to die as well, considering the sheer fact that he knew good and well how powerful Hela was, but still didn't care for it. So, without further ado, let's talk about it. What if Hela turned good? Our story begins when she's in the void, and she's already, killed the Valkyries and everything. She feels the anguish, the pain, and is upset at herself. And, well, more importantly, she's upset at Odin, her father, the person that she, loved and did everything for. And yet she feels like she was cast aside for nothing. Just because she called her father weak and was ready to defy him over the fact that, yeah, he was soft. He was different. He changed for some reason, and she didn't know why. They were so close to getting the Infinity Stones, and yet her father choked. Why? Why did he do such a thing? Why did he leave her here? And so, throughout the years, she begins to sit there and think. She thinks about all that she's done, all that her father has done. However, she understands that she was raised, she was trained for this purpose, and yet her father just expected her to, what, pick up a new lifestyle without any repercussions, without any transformation, without any mold, I should say. And so Hela begins to think, could she change? Could she have done things differently with her father? Maybe she could have been better for, her own sake. And so Hela makes a vow that if she ever has a chance to get out of here, she will do things better and do things her way. And so this is where we go to the events of Thor Ragnarok, the very beginning. As usual, Loki does deceive their father, Odin, just like in the original, and he tells him that their sister Hela is coming. Far stronger than I expected, but I used all my magic over the years to keep her back. She's dangerous. She's a monster. Far more dangerous than ever before. And so Odin does pass on, leaving them with that responsibility. However, when Hela comes out of the portal, she says the same thing. She would have loved to see him go, but she would have also loved to talk to him, to maybe reconnect with him, if you will. And this is where Thor simply states, why? Or pretty much asks her, why? And this is where she simply, explains that she and Odin never got along, always conquering the realms and everything. But the funny part is, you guys don't even know your own history, do you? To which Thor kind of stands there and tries to double down, saying that he does know, what his father was capable of. He does know what Odin was doing. And this is where Hela simply says, did you know about his ruthlessness, his tenacity, his hypocrisy? And Thor freezes for a moment. No one's ever talked about his father like that, in this kind of manner, in this kind of way. And he says, no, it's not true. My father would never. And this is where Hela says, take me to Asgard. Go on. I promise you I won't hurt you. Unless, you guys give me a reason to. And so Loki, without any hesitation, says, bring us back, despite Thor's protests. And so when Hela walks through even the trip there, she's calm. She's non-threatening in any way. And so everything kind of goes normally at first, right? However, when they get to Asgard, Fandral, Hogun, and Volstagg all draw their blades ready to attack, ready to stab her. However, Thor tells them to stand down. She's our sister, apparently. So Fandral immediately starts trying to spit some game at her. But again, she simply looks at him with disgust and discontent. And she says, no, I'm sorry, You're not really my type, unfortunately. And this is where she simply walks past him and actually tells Thor and Loki to follow her. And so they make their way to the throne room of Asgard, where Hela looks at the ceiling and says, "Ah, so Father decided to hide the past instead of simply embracing it, you know?" And this is where Thor says, "What do you mean?" To which he says, "Everything here is a lie." And Loki says, "Really? Can you prove that?" So Hela throws all of her swords, or multiple swords that she can construct, to the ceiling. And this is where everything comes crumbling down. Now, the citizens are fine, as they are far away from this. And even when one tries to, one of the rubble does try to go for one of the citizens, Hela simply destroys it, saving one of the people. And this is where they all see everything. Odin's conquest, everything, the beings he enlisted in his army. And this is where Thor sees something. A dragon that Hela used to ride on? How interesting. And he points this out, saying, "Who's that?" And she says, "Ah, that is my dearly beloved. I miss him so much. He was one of the few people that not only had stood by me, but actually joined me. This being the dragon, Fafnir." Now, if you guys don't know, other than God of War, Fafnir has also made multiple appearances in the comics as well, in the Thor comics, I should say. And well, he is a pretty powerful and prominent character, being able to not only go toe-to-toe with Thor, but actually is one of his stronger Rogues Gallery members. If I had to say how strong he is, he would probably be second only to, well, probably just below Mangog and Zerter when it comes to the physical strength of Thor's enemies. And, well, he's still alive, still. And this is where they simply explain that Father also banished him. To which he says, "Okay, great, where is he?" And this is where they kind of look at each other like, well, Sakaar. To which she looks at them almost in a little bit of anger. "You sent one of my closest friends to the Grand Master?" To which they say, okay, look, in their defense, he seemed to be a mindless beast at the time. So this is where Hela simply smacks Thor and then proceeds to point a blade at Loki and simply tells her he had better be alive. And this is where she simply instructs them to teleport them to Sakaar. Meanwhile, this also means that Thor does go on to find Heimdall, while her and Loki are the ones to go and find Fafnir. And so they do arrive on Sakaar. And well, kind of like in the original, some of these bounty hunters or some of these poachers or whatever you want to call them do try to capture them. But Hela simply just, with a flick of her wrist, throws a whole bunch of knives at him. However, someone saw this from the distance. Someone from Hela's past that, unfortunately, she cannot escape. And that being Valkyrie. Valkyrie sees her, and all this PTSD begins to open up, begins to flood in. And well, the first thing she does almost immediately is lunge at Hela. No hesitation, no nothing. And she tries to stab her with her blade, tries everything she can, but keep in mind she's, well, in some ways still drunk, if you will. And so she tries everything, tries to stab her, tries to combo her. However, Hela is not only holding back, but just using a simple form of finesse, maneuvering her wrist, simply slamming her to the ground. And this is where she realizes that due to her fighting style, despite her drunken state, she is a Valkyrie. And this is where she simply points her blade down at her and simply states, "I do apologize for my actions, but you must know that that is not my fault. It was my father's." To which this is where Valkyrie simply states, "You the same father that's ordered us to execute you? You killed all my friends." And this is where Hela simply states, "Yes, that is my father's fault. He knew my power. He knew how dangerous I was in that state, and the fact that I was enraged that my own father had banished me to a realm without any provocation or any reason why, other than just to punish me for what? Being disobedient to him? Is that fair that your people had to suffer for his own gain? Is it fair that I had to kill you all because he sent you to your death? Is it fair that y'all had to die for another person's mistakes or actions? And so Valkyrie thinks to herself, and Hela moves her blade back very slowly so that, in just in case she does try something, she, could just maybe nick her in the side, just she doesn't want to kill her, but again, it's just to kind of get that over with. And this is where Valkyrie begins to think to herself, dang, we really did get played, didn't we? And so Odin lost a large majority of us and simply threw us to the wolves, not even caring whether or not we died. And so this is where Valkyrie does stand up and simply states she cannot forgive her, but she can at least accept the fact that she's changed. And so this is where Hela simply states, take me to Fafnir. And so Hela, Loki, and Valkyrie make their way to the, I guess you could say, the Grand Champion's tower or the arena. And this is where Hela sees a draconic-like face at the top of it, along with someone Loki seems to recognize. And he says, well, do we really have to, go in there? And to which she says, what's wrong, Loki? Scared. To which he says, I'm not overly fond of the creature that's just sitting below him on the tower. To which he says, Hela simply states, well, get over it. We're about to go in here. I'm getting my friend back, whether you like it or not. And this is where they go into the arena, and Valkyrie introduces them to the Grand Master. And so, Grand Master does bow, as he is an elder of the universe, and he would actually, know of, Hela, at least to a certain extent, considering she is, a much older, I guess you could say, being than, or just as old, or probably a little bit younger than the Grand Master, right? So this is where the Grand Master pretty much welcomes them to his world and asks them, okay, so what do you guys want? Because, I can get you guys anything. To which she says, your prize champion, Fafnir, will be coming home with me. In which he says, oh, no, he can't do that. At least not at the moment, or ever, really. You see, he belongs to him. Odin gave him to him, or, pretty much banished him here, because he was a threat. Especially after your recent disappearance and your little, being a disobedient and disrespectful daughter, into which Loki kind of thinks to himself like, dear God, this man is about to get us all killed in a minute if you don't stop. And this is where Hela simply states, and with a much more darker aura around here, where is Fafnir? And this is where Grandmaster simply states, all right, follow me. And so leading them to the more royal or the more fancy observing area, this is where they observe Fafnir in the middle of the gladiator match with the Hulk, both brawling it out and just throwing hands left and right. They're hammering each other, blow after blow after blow. It's just a slugfest at this point, to the point where Hulk even grabs one of Fafnir's horns and breaks it off. But Fafnir tail slaps the Hulk into the arena wall and even holds his head in pain and even shouts, dude, again? You always go for the horns. To which Hulk simply states, doesn't care. He just says, doesn't matter. We're fighting. And this is where Fafnir says, all right, fine, your funeral. And this is where when Hulk goes in for a punch, Fafnir ducks underneath, wraps Hulk in a full Nelson, spreads his wings on his back, and simply lifts Hulk into the air and essentially performs one of my favorite moves, in all honesty, a seismic toss, slamming Hulk into the ground. And he's about to finish him until the Grand Master, simply shocks him in the neck, causing him to kind of seizure up and stroke out like he did with Thor. And this is where Hulk actually takes the opportunity to actually try and claim the championship for himself. However, Fafnir, in a split second, or at least in a moment lazily glance, sees Hela in the pent box. And that gives him enough energy to actually be like, nah, can't lose in front of the Hulk. And this is where he not only stops Hulk's dive bomb, or, grabs Hulk's dive bomb with his bare hands, he simply lets out a white fire breath. All right? He simply blasts him with this white fire breath, scorching the Hulk and knocking him out. And pretty much this is where the arena, or at least the contestants, not the contestants, the audience begins chanting his name. Fafnir, 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 as he pretty much steps on the Hulk and pretty much roars to the skies triumphant. But when he looks back to the view box, he sees Hela again, and they're both happy to see each other, like absolutely ecstatic. Now, if you guys want to know what Fafnir will look like, I guess this is pretty much, I know this is a fan-made picture, it's not my own, but this is the best way I could definitely interpret how Fafnir looks. Unlike his comic counterpart, he does get a bit of a remodel and upgrade, and this is where he simply flies up to the view box, and Hela's hand is against the glass, and he puts his hand, against it as well, saying it's good to see her again. And so this is where Grandmaster says he will arrange a meeting for them in just a little bit, but right now let Fafnir recover. And so an hour later, this is where they meet Fafnir in, I guess you could say, his own penthouse room, while Hulk is pretty much in his own area, just, in his own traditional or regular room and stuff like that. So yeah, he's chilling at the moment. Obviously gonna have to get a hot tub and soak all those injuries he just received from the whooping that Fafnir gave him. And so Hela and Fafnir both begin to catch up, saying that it's been years since they've seen each other, but Hela wonders what happened. So Fafnir begins to explain. When he found out she had been banished after one of the worlds she conquered, of course he did storm Asgard in a fit of rage, trying to demand Odin why he would send her away after all that, he's done. And Loki's kind of off to the side, a little bit wary and a little bit terrified, considering he does know how dangerous and how powerful Fafnir is. And this is where Fafnir simply does note this to Loki, that if he wanted to kill him, he would have done it by now. Relax, sit down, grab a drink even. And this is where he pretty much explains that he winded up on Sakaar here for, he doesn't even know how long. One of his most recent beings he simply fought was that green Goliath down there called the Hulk. And well, this is where Hela begins to explain that, well, now she's back and she can get him out of here. To which he says, how? Pointing to the shock collar on his neck that's been hard to remove for years. However, this is where Valkyrie simply states, yeah, I got you. And this is where she also removes the shock collar from him. And this actually, this helps. This gets him free and he feels like himself again. And so, before any of the Grandmaster's guards can come in, the four of them do transport themselves back to Asgard, where everything seems to be going swimmingly at the moment. However, Thor states that not everything is all right at the moment. And this is where Hela looks at him like, what do you mean everything's not okay? Like, what do you mean everything's not fine? And this is where Thor begins to explain that, well, Heimdall has seen a god fall. To which they're looking at him like, what do you mean a god fall? The god Fafnir, or Fafnir, whichever one his name was, the giant beast god that Gorr originally killed anyway. And this is where Fafnir looks confused. You mean the god that was wrestling black holes for fun? Dude was like one of my biggest competitions back then. You mean to tell me he's dead? To which he says, yes, and right now they need to go investigate. So, Thor, Loki, Hela, and Fafnir are the ones to go. This being kind of like the squad for the moment, right? And this is where everyone kind of takes note that it's just a whole lot of slaughter. And this is where, as they get to Fafnir's body, they notice black creatures simply consuming him and absorbing his power. And then they turn their attention to Thor, Loki, Hela, and Fafnir. And this is where they begin to descend upon the group, and this is where Hela simply tells them to stand their ground. They're going to be okay, especially considering she senses something about them. And this is where, as the creatures descend upon the group, Hela waves her hand, and the creatures disperse. And she says, "As I thought, death itself is at play. Someone's wielding the necrosword." To which Fafnir looks at her like, "You gotta be kidding. I thought that weapon should have been destroyed ages ago. The last person who wielded it was killed." And to which she says, yeah, she knows. But it seems that someone else or something else has that blade and is simply using it for their own gain, killing any god in their path. And so this is where we pan over to the distance, where we see a hooded figure standing there, all blacked up and dressed in a robe. And this is where we see that it is none other than Gorr the God Butcher. And that's where I'm going to leave it off here, you guys. How do you guys feel about the inclusion of one of Thor's villains as an ally? Will the world serpent appear? Yeah, he is going to appear. So, yeah, just get ready for that entirely. But how is this going to play into Infinity War with Hela also being there? And how will Gorr be drastically different from the original? But hey, that's going to be all today, you guys. Just comment down below, like and subscribe and share with your friends. This is Legendary Grimlock, and I hope you guys have a blessed day.